Senator Paul. I want to welcome you to this conference call. Appreciate you taking the time to address these issues that pastors are concerned about. For those of you who don't know, I'm Randy Robison. I am the co-author of Our Presidents and Their Prayers with Senator Paul, which is available now in bookstores and on Amazon. And since we do have pastors in the audience, I'll mention it. It has some great sermon material, and it makes a great gift, so check that out. Senator, is there anything you want to say before we get to the questions?
Well, I just wanted to thank Randy for being part of this and also for bringing me the idea on the book. The book is basically a collection of prayers and proclamations of all the different presidents, but then also interwoven with ideas and thoughts about why we shouldn't be embarrassed to say we are a religious nation. We shouldn't be embarrassed to say we're a Christian nation. And it's kind of funny in politics because so often you have people, reporters think it's sort of a gotcha question. Are we a Christian nation? And I think it's been forgotten. And a lot of people, want to ignore our history that, sure, all of our presidents have been Christian and our founding fathers were Christians, and that we shouldn't really want to run away from our history. Now, we aren't a country that has a state religion, and I think we're all proud of that. We want to have the freedom to worship as we see fit and not have a state religion, but also we shouldn't be somehow running away and saying that religion and notion of right and wrong and Christianity haven't been a large part of the founding of our country and really the moral backbone and the foundation of our country.
How do we protect religious liberty while accommodating those who are secular or don't profess any religion? How do we maintain that balance?
I think a lot of times it's a confusion somehow about the separation of church and state. The First Amendment says that Congress shall pass no law. It was really, a lot of the First Amendment was about government not getting involved in religion and government not, preventing people from establishing and worshiping as they chose. But it doesn't mean we have a state religion, and most of us don't want there to be any kind of official state religion. In fact, that's one of the main complaints I have about so many countries in the world that do have state religions is they actually make it illegal to criticize their religion. And in many of the different Islamic states, it's in fact the death penalty for criticizing the religion. So about a year ago, I actually put forward an amendment, foreign aid amendment, to say that we shouldn't give aid to countries who persecute Christians. And we defined persecution as putting Christians to death for criticizing the state religion or for interfaith marriage or for conversion. And there's about 25 or 30 countries that actually have these laws on the books. In fact, there are Christians that are on death row now in certain countries simply for criticizing or being accused of criticizing the state religion. So while we do have separation of church and state in our country, we aren't really a country that does not have religious people in government or doesn't see that basis for the way government was formed. In fact, Senate starts every day with a prayer. I was at the White House last night and ran into the chaplain of the House. And so for people to think that somehow separation of church and state means not having religious people in government or not having religious affairs at public venues, I think they're just dead wrong. But I also like the way, and we mentioned this in the book, that Washington says that, a democracy requires a virtuous people. I also am a big fan of the theologian and writer Os Guinness, who talks about how that liberty requires virtue, and that those of us who advocate for liberty don't want basically a society in which everybody behaves without any restraint. We want a society in which there are, virtue abounds among the people, and people do actually act with restraint. But we just acknowledge that government can't be all of the answer, that the people themselves have to embrace virtue because it's a self-selected trait, not something that's all enforceable.
Regarding the bill you just mentioned, do you know how much foreign aid we do give to those countries that persecute Christians?
We give about $30 billion total, and when I put that amendment forward, I thought we would win the vote and we wouldn't send any to these countries persecuting Christians, and yet we lost the vote 18-2. And this boggles my mind because as I travel the country and in speech after speech, I'll ask people, do you think we should stop sending money to countries that hate us and that persecute Christians? And to a person, I have not met a person outside of Washington who's for this, and yet the vast majority of official Washington is still for giving unlimited money to countries that hate us. And I don't quite get this. They think that we're somehow going to buy friendship and buy better behavior. But, we have people like Asia Bibi has been on death row for 5 years in Pakistan for supposedly criticizing the state religion, and that's a problem. And I think that the message we should be sending is that our tax dollars will not go to support that kind of belief.
Personally, I'd like to hear you press that issue a little more. I hope you speak on that. Let me shift gears to one that hits a little more closer to home. And, we had a lot of attention this past summer focused on the abortion industry and a lot of light shed on what's going on. And that's an issue that's obviously close to Christians, to pastors. At the same time, it seems like we've seen very little headway to slow or stop abortion on demand in this country. What can we do to win this fight?
The videos that came out of Planned Parenthood were horrific, and I think they refocused people's attention. They also refocused people's attention because it was hard for the liberals and the left to escape the fact that we were talking about babies here. The left wants to make it about, we're talking about a few cells here. We're never talking about babies. But with the Planned Parenthood video, it became very apparent we were talking about babies. We were talking about manipulating and turning babies around so they could harvest their organs. And we were talking about selling of organs. And I think the videos just really, really got people focused on how horrible this is and how awful it is and how we need to be united to try to stop this. And I think we could win the battle. But I think in Congress you have so many people who've been here so long in Washington that they're beaten down by the system that they just give up and they aren't willing to fight the good fight anymore. Often you are told that basically we can't get to 60 votes in the Senate because the Democrats won't join us to defund Planned Parenthood. But really the opposite could be true. All of the spending expires every year at the end of the year. We have a fiscal year where we vote for money for 1 year. So Planned Parenthood's money expires at the end of the year. All we would have to do is let it expire. And then when we restart the funding, we should look to the other side and say, instead of taking 60 votes to defund Planned Parenthood, we should say now it takes 60 votes to fund Planned Parenthood. And I think we could stop things like this. In addition, there's also just enormous amounts of waste. There's the foreign aid. There's all these crazy things that we're building in other countries that we don't have money for. And all of that could be fixed if we were willing to let it expire. Then we would use our leverage to then try to reopen the parts of government that are essential, defending the country, court system, highways. There's a certain amount of government that we do have enough money for, but we should let it expire. And I think the frustration I sense in the country is that we're not really adequately using the power of the purse.
You've been one who has made it a point to say that Congress makes the laws and controls the power of the purse. What can a president do and should a president do on these issues ranging from funding to foreign aid to abortion and all those issues? What can one man do?
The presidency's become so powerful, and I think too powerful, but it's all been used really to increase the power and dominion over the people. And so I think a president who wanted to use that power to undo things could do quite a bit. So many of the regulations that have been enforced by the president through official or executive order could be undone by executive order as well. There are some things on abortion that can be done. One of those is not having any public funding go to abortion and making sure that it doesn't occur, on military bases, et cetera, around the world. And when we've had some Republicans, we have enforced that, and then when the Democrats have come in, they've reversed that. But there are some things that can be done by executive order. But the bottom line is, I think you want a president who will use the bully pulpit to speak out for life, who will march for life, who will say and combat people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who says that a baby only is alive when it, leaves the nursery, and that any decisions before that are between the doctor and the mother. So I think that we have every chance if we stand up, but I think a president who would stand up and use the power for good could undo quite a bit of the executive orders that have been passed in the past.
Speaking of the president and the bully pulpit, we heard just the third Oval Office speech on Sunday night. What are your thoughts on the president's latest speech?
Well, I think he kind of mistakes and wants to sort of play a bait-and-switch game here. Instead of talking about this being an act of terrorism, which it obviously was, he wants to talk about gun control. And I think that's something that really mistakes where the real problem is. And I think so many on that side, if they can't name the enemy, and the enemy is radical Islam, if you can't name it, then I don't know how we're ever going to combat it. I think they want to play up that this is all about gun control, but even the facts of the gun control really don't argue for what they're talking about. In California, we have the most strict gun control laws in the country. We have every law that the left has wanted to pass nationally is already passed in California, and yet these guns were still purchased in California. I think it also illustrates the point that if you're dead set on a suicide attack, you're not really too concerned with gun control laws. And so law-abiding citizens will pay attention. Like Washington, D.C., no law-abiding people have a gun in Washington, D.C., but all the criminals do. So I think really if we look at this in terms of gun control, really the argument and the facts are in our favor that more gun control is not the answer.
Would banning people on a no-fly list from acquiring guns legally, would that have any effect?
Well, it sounds good, and part of me says, well, obviously we don't want terrorists to have guns, and if the list were foolproof, I think it would be a good idea. The only way I can think of that you can do it is if you're going to have a list, you would have to have people have the ability to protest being on the list. So, for example, I don't think you can take away someone's First Amendment right to practice their religion or to have free speech, or their Second Amendment right unless they have a court proceeding. The watch list has shown to have errors in the past. Ted Kennedy was accidentally on the watch list. The musician Cat Stevens was on the watch list. So I think we have to be careful about giving government the right to create a watch list for which you cannot protest. A couple years ago in Missouri, one of these anti-terrorism centers they call fusion centers had a list of people, types of people that the police were supposed to be wary of and maybe pull over if they see them with a bumper sticker and they, believe it or not, included pro-life bumper stickers, Constitution Party bumper stickers, and even bumper stickers of my dad's supporters once upon a time. And so you have to be careful of giving the government too much power to decide who's going to be on the watch list. But if people truly are terrorists and we have a process for people protesting by court, then I think we could do something where we ban people. But I'm worried about doing it without any kind of controls where mistakes wouldn't have any kind of possibility to be corrected.
So what do we do to help stop future Christmas party massacres in the United States?
I think one thing we need to do to prevent terrorism is I think we need to have control of our borders. So I don't think we can have an open border, and this has been a dispute I've been having with Marco Rubio for some time now, is that he wants to indicate that he's for a strong national defense, but I just don't think you can be for a strong national defense if you're not for defending the borders. I think right now that there's enough danger that we just need to have a temporary halt or a moratorium on immigration until we can get a better handle. Think about it this way. Almost every terrorist attack we've had so far has included legal immigration from certain countries. This woman came through Saudi Arabia and Pakistan on a fiancé visa. The Boston bombers came here on a refugee visa. The two Iraqi potential bombers that came to my hometown in Kentucky came here on refugee visas. The 9/11 hijackers, all 19 of them, came on visas. And so what we need to do is we need to have a better vetting system of who's coming. And so I want 100% entry and exit knowledge. And once we have that, then I think we could restart normal immigration. But for a while, I would just push pause and say we're going to slow it down for now. People say, well, gosh, that's not fair. Well, nobody really has a right to come to our country. It's a privilege and an honor to let people come to our country. And if you look back to World War II, right in the beginning of the 20th century, about 1 million people a year were coming to our country. But when you get to World War II, when we were at war with a lot of the rest of the world, we actually reduced it to about 24,000 people a year. So immigration does go down in times of war, and I think it's not unreasonable to look at controlling who comes and how long they stay and whether they're paying attention to the rules.
Another country that's had to deal with immigration and terrorism quite a bit is Israel. How should the United States approach our relationship with Israel?
I think Israel's the one democracy in the Middle East, and they've been our steadfast ally and vice versa for a long time. So I think that's something that we keep in perspective of everything we do is that we do have an ally. I think as we move forward, it's important that in some ways we think that we always seem to know best, but I think sometimes that we try to insert ourselves too much into telling Israel what to do as far as where they build, where they don't build, what exactly the peace process has to include. Ultimately, I think the peace process has to include what Israel believes is best for Israel. But the other thing we shouldn't do is I think we shouldn't be funding the enemies of Israel. So I've introduced a bill that would have said that the Palestinian Authority, as long as they're aligned in a unity government with Hamas, that we shouldn't be sending foreign aid to the Palestinians. And a lot of people don't realize that we do send aid to the Palestinians. And I think that direct aid should be contingent on them not being involved with Hamas.
President Obama refers to the Islamic State, or ISIS, as ISIL. I've heard that reference to the Levant, which is what the L stands for, is in some way disrespectful towards Israel and claiming it as Arab land. Do you have any inside knowledge on the whole ISIL-ISIS differentiation?
Not really, and it's funny that everybody has these different names for it. I just went with the first name, which was ISIS, which I thought was easy for everybody to remember. But Levant, I think, refers to a bigger region, and I guess under some definitions it would include sort of Syria, Israel, and all the region over there. And you're right, that's probably maybe what ISIS claims, because ISIS is pretty grandiose in their claims as to what they rule. You're right, I hadn't thought about it that way, but probably would be an insult because it would imply that they think that they will eventually rule over all of that land.
Yeah, one more question. I appreciate your time, Senator. And that goes to the race that you're in right now. You're consistently in the 2 to 4% range in most of the polls that I see. What is your strategy to gain more support and ultimately win the GOP nomination?
Well, the interesting thing is we think that the polls really probably aren't very accurate at this point. We just had a race in Kentucky where the Republican was said to be down 5 points 1 week before the election, and then he won by 8. So really the pollsters were off 13 points in the final week. We think the pollsters are having more difficulty because not many people have landlines anymore, and it's just hard to get people to answer on cell phones. We also do pretty well with college kids, and the college kids, they just don't get involved in presidential polling at all. In fact, I don't think I've ever met a college kid who's done a presidential poll. So we think maybe we're doing better than the polls indicate, but we also are working very hard. We have a ground game where we're knocking on doors, calling people, and really trying to work hard to get students out. Our goal in Iowa is 10,000 students. We're organized on 20 campuses in Iowa, 400 campuses around the country. That is one of our secret weapons. We also think we do well with independents. We also, I think, do well with what I call the liberty movement within the Republican Party. So our hope is that if we can put all three of those together, that we can actually, pull together a coalition that can actually win.
That's it for this call. We appreciate all of you guys taking some time to listen to it. We encourage you to share it with your friends, share it on Facebook, and most of all, to pray for the country and get people involved in this election.